Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's a pleasure to be here today in Cannes. We have heard some very topical discussions this morning, covering a lot of ground, and I see also the agenda, which was just communicated. There's some very engaging sessions. So we will certainly learn a lot, but let me first share some thoughts on the topic that I will be discussing with you today. It's about change. It's about sourcing opportunities in a changing context. It's a very broad topic, and I will not necessarily dive very much into depths, but I will try to cover as much as I see in terms of scope. Looking at the various themes of the conference, I think there is very clearly one which emerges, and that's about change and challenges. We are talking about reality checks, adaptation, transformations, new chapters. So it's clearly about change, and this change, unfortunately, is not a change of choice. It's a change which is imposed on all of us. There are lots of challenges, basically battering the European economy, but also the world economy. First and foremost, climate change. And our inability to continue to keep doing what we were doing for so many years with finite resources and often at the expense of the planet. Then there is the pandemic and the ensuing disruptions that we have known, disruptions in the supply chain, but more generally in the way we are working. The war in Ukraine and the energy crisis are having multiple effects on the economy, but also more generally on the geopolitical scene, and they influence also the way we will be producing, consuming, and sourcing energy. And of course, there's inflation. So what a time to be alive. And all of these challenges lead to change is the order of the day, but change means also opportunity, and it must mean opportunity. And that's what I would like to talk about briefly today, how these shifting economic and geopolitical realities are giving rise to opportunities, how we think that we should be addressing them, and how, of course, we see the various challenges involved. But first, let me say a few words about the European Investment Fund. So we are part of a big EU family. Our main shareholder is the European Investment Bank, but we have also the EU represented through the Commission. And we are in a certain way, together with our mother, the financing arm for the EU policy. So policy priorities are at the heart of what we are doing. And in particular for the EIF, it means financing SMEs, but also infrastructure. Infrastructure, so equity and guarantees. On the equity side, because that is the key focus today, which represents about 1/3 of what we are doing, we act like a fund of funds. So we do not invest directly in SMEs, but we invest in funds. And we have currently some 600 partners or funds in which we invested in all stages, in all geographies, all kinds of vintage years. It's a kind, therefore, of intermediate model where we are making use of the knowledge of the funds. Our knowledge is to select the funds. The best funds can also be first-time teams, by the way, but the funds have the expertise to select the SMEs. Now, the advantage of this model is that you have at different levels a crowding in of private investors, because if you put private and public money, our aim is to crowd in more money to mobilize more and to have a leverage effect. Historically, if you look, there are different ways to measure it, but for each euro that we invest, we see a minimum 5 at the level of the funds on average, and then around 15 in terms of mobilized investments if you go down to the level of the SMEs. Our aim in investing every year around 3.5 billion, and we will certainly increase in the next years our amounts. We actually envisage to double them to 7 billion per year in the next 2 years. Our aim is to make sure that we fulfill our mission, which is to address market failures, to make sure that we not only find the brightest entrepreneurs, but that they have the access to the funding they need, And at the same time, since we are using private money, but also taxpayers' money, we want to make sure that we achieve the objectives so that we effectively reach out to the right target groups, but also do it in an efficient way. So we are very careful in the way we invest the money. Not that we don't take risk, but we want to make sure that we have the right monitoring, compliance, etc. in place. Now, coming back now to the topics of today, and which is change and opportunity. I think it's quite clear that the war in Ukraine has forced Europe to accelerate its green transition. It was already very clearly the flagship initiative of the EU, but I think it's even clearer now that we need to do more and probably faster than we thought. And we see, as the fund, an opportunity here, not only a need, but an opportunity to invest in climate infrastructure funds that are pursuing the changes that we want to see in the energy sector. And the EU has also thrown its political power behind these initiatives, and not only its political power, it has also made available resources, and rather significant resources. I'm referring here to two programs. The first is InvestEU. It's a program which has a broad scope, but also a very clear focus on climate transformation and digital transformation. And we are already under this program, which is operational, investing in funds that are making a difference in greening the efforts, climate action, environmental sustainability. In total, we at the EIF level will be getting some 11 billion of funds for this. And I believe with the leverage I referred to, this could translate realistically into some 145 billion of finance for SMEs in the field. I'm also referring to another program, which is Repower EU. Here the estimates coming from the authors of this plan, so the European Commission, is that we would need probably some 300 billion until 2030 to reduce fully our dependence on Russian fossil fuels, of which 210 billion by 2027, and we may have even to accelerate it. Now, we are contributing together with our mother to this effort. We concretely, in the area of venture capital and private equity, will be investing 3 billion in three areas. One is sustainable energy. The second one is energy efficiency and energy transition. The third one is green innovation and hydrogen. And together with our partners on the ground, we are looking at the funds again. We want to make a real impact, and with the 3 billion, I think we can leverage probably 45 billion. Now, when we look at infrastructure, in particular, we see a very significant gap when it comes to investments in the EU, and a lot of potential. Potential in many areas, from clean energy to transport, but also in the area of digital and social infrastructure, circular economy, and so on. Currently, in this specific field, we are investing roughly 1 billion a year, but we intend to double it to 2 billion, again in a time horizon of 2 years. We have a huge pipeline in this, there are even bigger needs, and we will certainly step up our allocation. What we do currently, having this policy mission, is to focus on the asset creation on the ground. It means, of course, greenfield, new infrastructure assets, but it means also refurbishment and growth of existing assets. So both are possible. And again, we want to make sure that we inject the best practices, and best practice in the field is Paris alignment and do not significant harm. So that's part of our due diligence, but it's also what I think is being expected by those who entrust us the money. And we will measure. We want to measure the outcomes. So many ways of doing that, but we have a rather sophisticated impact measurement methodology, and it's not black and white. We accompany the funds on their journey. Now, third area of opportunities I would like to focus on, we will hear a little bit more later today, is the focus on disruptive technologies, the key industries of the future, the industrial champions of tomorrow. Beyond the green transition, there's indeed also a question of digital transition and of the change in the nature of the industry. I think Europe has been trailing for too long, and we need, again, to get ahead of the game, to be part of the leaders in the change, to direct it. And we see a great opportunity in investing in disruptive technology, in entrepreneurs that are developing the solutions of tomorrow, the entrepreneurs who will be listed in hopefully a few years' time on stock exchanges where currently, if you look at them, the top 100 has only companies which were around already 50 years ago, here in Europe, which is very different from what we see in the US or in China. And we are looking at sectors of strategic importance. It's broad range. I mean, it goes from chips, semiconductors, space, cybersecurity, but also quantum computing, AI, blockchain, life science, and so on. So quite some technologies identified also by the European Union, where Europe wants to be part of those who lead the change. And we see also a strong political will here. It's important to have finance, but also political signal is very important to boost Europe's strategic autonomy in the key sectors of the economy of tomorrow. There are proposals about EU Sovereign Fund. Commissioner Breton has put them forward, and I'll come back to it. But there's certainly quite a lot of things we have to do in this area. Now, let me say also that this process is not a contradiction to Europe's openness. So it's not about ring fencing or excluding other countries. We have, I think, a long history of openness in Europe. It's a cradle of international trade. It's unthinkable that it would function otherwise. But we need to ensure that our ability to operate in key sectors and to lead and also nurture new flourishing ecosystems that will drive the change is not jeopardized by external factors. And I think we need also to be less naive in Europe. Now, that's why we see one of our missions improving the European competitiveness and working in sectors that we consider to be the industries or the cradle for the industries of the future. And we are investing in funds that seeking out these innovators that are developing technological breakthroughs, the champions of tomorrow. There are many examples for that. I mean, they span from efficient charging stations for electric vehicles, battery storage, to efficient cooling systems for massive data centers, etc., etc. And when these technological offerings mature, scale up, are replicated, then I believe that small ideas even can make a big difference. We are always looking for fund managers with a portfolio of good ideas that we want to back and make sure that the entrepreneurs get access to the finance they need throughout the various stages of funding. I think this continuity in the funding chain is key. So for us, it's important indeed to work on the big fields, energy independence, European competitiveness in the global arena, digitalization and so on. But it's not only because the IF thinks so. We are working a lot with our partners, reaching out to them, more than 600 fund managers, make really surveys, and what we hear there from the field corroborates in a certain way this perception. Because last time we did it a few months ago, the feedback we got is that the fund managers themselves have identified very promising sectors. They're not the only ones, but we heard very often energy, environment, and healthcare. So it's as much a top-down political interest as a bottom-up feeling of investment opportunities that we see. Now, all of this, what I said, the changes doesn't go without challenges, and I see at least 7, and probably it's not exhaustive, could be many more, but let me mention a few that we see. And the challenges, again, are also the other side, the flip side of the opportunities. So first, yes, there are resources available. We have a lot of resources available. We'll get even more, but we really need many more, in our view. So we have heard indeed about the European Commission's call for a European Sovereignty Fund. It's something that we have been advocating also for some time. It's, in my view, very important proposal, would constitute a huge step ahead. We know at the same time that there are very little means, financial means, resources available at the EU level and also at the member state level. So we need the critical mass, the right type of tools to do it, and the right focus on those sectors that are key for our EU sovereignty. And I believe you need, and this is what we see now more and more in the press, including by our political leaders, we need to have something concrete beyond state aid to match the ambitions that have been made clear through the American Inflation Reduction Act. So we need something equivalent in Europe. I referred already to the continuity in the funding chain. It's important that we support innovative entrepreneurs all the way, from the very early pre-seed stages through the early stage, growth stage to the IPO. And it's the only way that we can ensure that we create the value here in Europe and we avoid relocation. That brings me to another point, which is a real problem in Europe. It's the scale-up gap. So we certainly had, for many years, comparative to other industrialized countries, market failure when it came to early stage. I wouldn't say it has fully been addressed, but it's certainly improving a lot. But where we are still very weak compared to US, China, and other industrialized countries is the growth stage. So we have excellent universities, really centers of excellence. We take the highest risk in the early stages, but when it comes then to bigger tickets being invested, we often don't have the funds which have the critical size, and I'm talking about funds of 1 billion or plus, which can put really big tickets also into companies, 100 million or more in Europe. And as a consequence of that, we see that some of these companies in dire need of finance start relocating. They get the tickets from the US or for somewhere else. And I think what we want is fine. I'm happy for the companies, but I think we should certainly from a EU perspective make sure that we can also reap the benefits of our risk-taking here in Europe. That we make sure that the companies themselves, the mid-caps or so, who have been on the trajectory and who have received risk finance in earlier stages, can have access, can have an alternative for finding resources here also in Europe. And if they want to take it from US, that's fine as well, but currently there's no alternative. And they don't need to relocate. So that is the scale-up gap, and I think there will be another session on that this afternoon with Alain Godard. Now, of course, there are also very different other challenges. One is when we talk about greening, the economic climate is of course a risk of greenwashing. We are very much aware of it. And we are working a lot also on the definitions, the taxonomy being aligned, criteria, subsequent monitoring. So it's very important for us to get it right. At the same time, I believe we need to find the right balance. And that's my fourth challenge, I would say. It's a challenge what you do in order to attract other investors, in particular private investors. And I think here, of course, there's a question of mindset, making sure that the public sector has the right risk appetite to support in taking the highest risk when private investors are not necessarily able or willing to take it. If it works, there's no need for us. If it doesn't work in very, very early stage or so, I think there may be. So that is one, but the other one is that we make sure that we have a balance between all the requirements that are often imposed, the strings coming together with programs and the funding sources, and the needs of SMEs. And I think the key word here is proportionality. So there's a lot which is required in terms of AML, monitoring, reporting, but I think we need to find the right balance here. One of the points in attracting private resources is also make sure you have an exit perspective. And here again, the feedback we are getting from our partners on the ground is that the situation is deteriorating. There was a recovery in 21, but currently the exit environment has deteriorated, although we still had exits, I must say, late last year and early this year. In general, the feeling is becoming more pessimistic, and it's as pessimistic as it was at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020. When I look at infrastructure, one of the challenges is fundraising. It's an alternative asset class, and clearly there are institutional investors involved. They have seen at least many of them, certain adjustment when it comes to the valuations of their assets. And in addition, this is combined by the fact that sometimes they have also reduced the allocation to alternative asset classes. So we have a double effect. So we would need more, but less may be available, and that's certainly a challenge. And the last but not least, since we are a public institution, although we work with market discipline, specialize in access to finance, we are, of course, fully aware of the economic changes, the industrial evolution, technology advances, and so on. But it means also that we need to keep abreast and to keep up with these changes as partner of the financial ecosystem. And that means we need to find the right talent. So it's also a matter of skills in the ecosystem itself. Now, to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt we are living all through a period of very dramatic changes. I would also almost qualify it as tectonic changes. It's much geopolitical, industrial, environmental, digital, all of this at the same time. And that's what the president of EIB Group, Mr. Hoyer, spoke about in Davos, and he called it a polycrisis. And the polycrisis needs to be turned also in poly-opportunity. So our ability to adapt to these changing circumstances, turning crisis into opportunity, will define tomorrow. There's no easy way about it. We need adequate firepower. We need to address market gaps. We need to overcome administrative burdens. We need to offer a multitude of adapted financing solutions for different needs. And we need to effectively be able to attract private and public resources in the right direction. So there's no panacea to do it in one go. But here in Europe, we have many assets. I already referred to it. We have world-leading universities, research institutions, we have very bright entrepreneurs. And I think we have also a strong political will, more and more every day, to push in the right direction at the EU level, national level, regional level. Venture capital and private equity, you all, have never been more important to the European economy, its competitiveness, and our green and digital transition. And I'm confident that together we can source the opportunities needed in a changing context. Thank you.